Hey, are you introducing our guest speaker today?
Yeah, I mean, I'm meeting Tom for the first time. I appreciate all the work that everyone's done, including Bob Thurston, to help us schedule these speakers and these dates. And I'd like to introduce Bob's friend, Tom Fallows, who I believe knows about the Rotary and he's spoken to Rotary before. So, Tom, you can take it away.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, Lee. I'm delighted to be here, and it is true. I am spiritually a loyal Rotarian through my grandfather, who was a very active Rotary member outside of Philadelphia. I attended many activities with him and with my father. As Bob knows, I've had an international life, and being in the international world, it's harder to be in groups and associations like what you have. And I envy you guys. I've been out of the US for about 30 years. My joke is that I left California when Reagan was the governor. Then I left the US when Reagan was president. And so that dates me in terms of how far we've gone over the decades. The places I consider home, unfortunately don't include Cincinnati or Oxford, Ohio, but I'm from Southern California. Redlands is my hometown. I've heard of the Inland Empire, Riverside, and San Bernardino on the way to Palm Springs, that's where I grew up. If you've seen American Graffiti, that's the kind of background I had of a kid growing up in a small town and so on. I went to school in the Bay Area, and so San Francisco and Berkeley are home to me. I went to graduate school in Boston, so Boston, and I ran the Boston Marathon and stuff. That's my home. I went on a university program to Leningrad, St. Petersburg, so my hometown. I feel very comfortable in Leningrad. Moscow is close to my heart. I was there, and that's when I knew Bob and I were in the same dorm building in Moscow State University. And then I started working in Wall Street in New York City. As a small town kid, I associate myself, I feel close to Rotarians in Oxford. So my first time in Manhattan, I was terrified. This is the 1970s, and I did not like it at all. But later on, doing some graduate work, I had to do a month study at Columbia University. And I started to get the feel of New York City living as all neighborhoods. It's very different and can actually be charming. And so that's when I started to like New York. And then my first I switched careers, as you'll see from academics, where I was with Bob, into the banking world. I can talk about some of the reasons why I did that. And the one bank that had a spot for me was Chase Manhattan Bank, David Rockefeller's bank, which had a branch in Moscow. So my dream was somehow get back to Moscow, and I thought through the door of banking I could do that. Chase had the brilliant idea. They needed a gringo in Rome. And if there's a candidate for the job was Luigi Rossi writing about fiat, that would be one thing. But if Tom Fallows said fiat was okay, that would be better. Just from a American kind of trust. So they sent me to Rome. I had nothing to do with Italy. I interviewed based on my Russian language and so on, saying I could learn Italian, but I did have Spanish as a kid. So I was 10 years in Italy, and then joined Citibank over there. Rome and Milan. Milan is also a home to me. I moved to Paris, lived there 8 years. I found the woman of my dreams. And so that was, I had a daughter in Italy and a son in Paris. And so through the 80s and 90s, I was being very politically incorrect of the way European men behave with women. To me, it was normal, but I think I'd be in trouble if anybody did an investigation of me about saying "Ciao Bella" to a beautiful woman. That was a very normal way of life for me in Europe. But being an American gringo overseas with an American multinational, at a certain point, you realize you reach your ceiling. You can't go forward, to be the CEO of Citibank in Italy. the CEO of Citibank France, I don't pass as an Italian. I don't pass as a French guy. So the only way, career ways that I could do anything was to move on to the emerging markets. And they sent me to Korea. I spent an evening with my wife saying, honey, I guess where we're going. Try to imagine in your imagination where in the map we would be going. She couldn't guess the country Korea. And so that was a strange place. And that was where I was very close to the US Army because they had a very nice Army base in downtown Seoul. Then I was moved to Hong Kong. That was a fascinating job, but a tough job because it was a regional job. So it would be Monday over the weekend home in Hong Kong, Monday afternoon out, or Tuesday morning out. So I'd go to Malaysia or India or New Zealand or China or whatever. And then Thursday afternoon, Friday morning back in and spend the weekend with my family. So it was a very strange life, but it was very strenuous, always running to the airport. I loved it, but it was also a very tough time. And then came Lehman Brothers, and I was the oldest guy I knew in Citibank in Asia. So it's pretty clear the writing was on the wall. And the one place where they needed old fart, white gringo American bankers was in the Middle East. And so that's where I wound up by 2009 in Saudi Arabia. And I hated the idea of going there. My comment about living in Saudi was that it's sort of like the day before you go into prison. You can't stand it. You're terrified. It's going to be, your life is ending. After you get in there, you get used to it, and then it becomes okay. And then eventually I came to like living in Saudi, and I'll explain to you why. After that, at a certain point, my wife said, Cherie, you've taken me around the world. When are we going to see your country? And so we chose New York and Manhattan as sort of the best refuge for international people. I'm sure I feel very much at home with you guys talking about the Buckeyes or the Bengals. And I remember very well Dan Fouts and the frozen semifinals before the Super Bowl against the Bengals. And the Bengals won and then finally, thank God, lost to Joe Montana of the 49ers. But I can feel that way of, opening day for baseball. But my wife is not American, so it's not quite the same for her. So Manhattan works for us. So in any case, Rotary is, to me, a lovely place to get to know folks when you're in a town of similar views and so on. And so I respect and like that a lot. When you're overseas, it's harder. So I just had AmCham as my sort of anchor, the American Chamber of Commerce in France, the American Chamber of Commerce in Italy or so on, as a way to associate with like-minded people. The only thing like Rotary that I had overseas was in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. I was eventually a board member of a desert, Riyadh Rovers it was called, going caravanning, camping in the desert, which I really fell in love with. And so to give you an idea of what, for me as a loyal small town Rotarian kind of guy in Manhattan, I don't even know if there is a Rotary in Manhattan. It's very hard to associate with people like through the Rotary. So I'm a member of 4 clubs. I'm the Civil War, there's a Civil War fans club, I'm a member of that. There's a New York Historical Society Club, I'm a member of that. Professionally, I'm a banker. I'm a member of the New York Alternative Investment Roundtable. And as a sailor, I've applied to join the Huguenot Yacht Club. So I have four interests to try to make up for the lack of a Rotary membership here. But maybe if you give me a connection to Rotary in Manhattan, I'd be happy to contact them and see if I can join. So anyway, that's the background on me. Bob and I have been good friends and in contact for a long time. And when he came to New York last year, we were very lucky to meet up, and he asked me to join and talk about my life. So it's a little bit embarrassing to do a school presentation. What did I do in my life over the last 60 years or so? But it was fun to prepare it. So let me now pull that out. Here we go. So this is my original home. And so this is in terms of, for curriculum vitae and so on. So Southern California, I'm a product of the 50s baby boom. Berkeley is where I was a undergraduate. Harvard was in graduate school. Over my other university affiliations are Leningrad and Moscow. Work-wise on my CV, I talk about being a managing director in Citigroup. I'm now in an investment bank, managing director, Galileo Global Securities. Anybody want to talk investments? Happy to talk with you. Saudi Investment Bank, Chase Manhattan, we're all the places, but I have a company, Fallows Sailing Inc. And so for any of you of interested in sailing, I'll send you an invitation to my website. So anyway, here are some sample homes, other snapshots of my home. The top left corner was my last home in Saudi Arabia. To the top right was one of the homes we had in Hong Kong. The bottom left is the view out of my terrace. Bob was asking me about compost on the terrace, but that's the sunset from my living room in New York City. So these are various shots of me from my life. As I mentioned, Southern California, Russia history, banker, now sailor. But the one common denominator is a love of the world, and very happy to meet with new people like meeting with you guys today. Snapshots from my family. It chokes me up, but these are my parents to the bottom right. My dad as a sort of World War II. My Uncle Bob, who's the top left, he was in the Battle of the Bulge. And so he was a big fan of, I was a big fan of him. My dad was in the Navy, but he was too young to get in World War II, but he was in the Korean War naval doctor and was sent to California from the East Coast for GIs coming back across the Pacific. So here are snapshots of what to me, hometown meant, barbecuing in the backyard. And I'm sure you guys would have the similar experiences. I was the kid in the middle in the top right, and the bottom right in front of my mom. So it's a very typical Californian environment, at least. But what was unusual is my parents were very East Coast oriented. The joke that my mother would talk about was that she would want to put on a sweater and have the air conditioning on just to sort of remember the East Coast. But we had plenty of books which explained my interest with Bob about education and universities. So this is snapshots again, and I'm sure you guys can relate to this also. Growing up in a small town, and as I mentioned, the Bengals and Joe Montana and stuff, to me, the Rams were always the big thing for me. In Redlands used to be the summer training camp for the Rams out of LA in the days of Bob Waterfield and Crazy Legs Hirsch and people like that. So that's how I fell in love with the Rams when I was a kid. Things happened. I got radicalized, above all because of my brother. If you've heard of James Fallows, word of advertising, he and his wife have an HBO special of going around the country in a small airplane. They have interviewing people, community people of what's good about America. And one of the themes of his stuff, he has a new HBO show coming out very soon. One is the thing is what's good about America, what's healthy and very positive about America are small towns. So people like people in Oxford, Ohio, or Redlands, California, I think can relate to that. But because my brother was in college when I was in sort of late junior high and high school, I, with him, got very involved with civil rights movements in the late 60s, obviously led to anti-Vietnam War protests. And I have the greatest respect for Vietnam vets. I see some Vietnam vet helmets. And so that was a difficult generational moment, I think, for all of us. But anyway, so that's what happened to me. From the 70s through the 80s, well, the 70s was a time for me as a scholar. And so this is a real life photo of me in Russia to the top left with my prior wife, the daughter of my daughter, the mother of my daughter that Bob knew in Moscow State University. The dorm where Bob and I lived is the top right, Moscow State. I love that. You know, people go to Ohio State. I went to Moscow State. Leningrad State, which is now St. Petersburg, is in the bottom right. Harvard, you'll notice in the other sign in my dissertation, was on one of the origins of one aspect of the Russian Revolution that Bob knows very well, the whole thing of Russian liberals and Russian radicals who are not Bolsheviks, who are good guys trying to help the peasants and so on. Guess, spoiler alert, they lost. And that was also at the time when I started to realize I needed to think about plan B career-wise. Bob, I don't know if you remember this when you started graduate school, but for me, there is a famous letter sent to all graduate students like in 1974, 75 saying, warning, you'll have no job when you finish. And that was the academic crisis of the late 80s, or the early 80s when Bob and I were finishing. Bob was lucky he found a way to stay in. I started to think of plan B and started to work on economics and statistics. And so that was, I felt, my bridge to do something else. But just in terms of, and Bob and I can talk history for a long time, but one thing I think Bob and I both share is the history from the bottoms up, looking at the details on you know, so what I call the Tolstoy War and Peace. You know, if you've read War and Peace, and one thing that Tolstoy talks a lot about is all the little incidents in the events of the Battle of Borodino and so on. It's not Napoleon, it's not the Russian generals, it's the actions by little people on the ground that make a difference. And that was part of what I was finding in terms of the roots of Russian agrarian radicalism before the revolution. So anyway, I switched careers. This is me as a banker on the bottom left in this photo. This is in Italy. And you know, why did I leave academics? And this is something you guys, we can talk about in the Q&A. I had an academic snob kind of prejudice. Bob, I don't know if you are guilty of this, but I certainly was. You think in the university, you're smarter than other people who are not in the university. Oh, yeah. And when I started to think about alternatives, plan B, what else could I do? I realized there are smart people outside. And when I was in Moscow, I was interviewing people in different careers. I contact the US Embassy to say, what would it be like if I'm a Soviet specialist to work with you guys? I approached Hedrick Smith, if you know him, you know, people in the New York Times, the Washington Post Bureau in Moscow. What would it be like? Could I be a journalist to cover the Russian beat? And I met some Russian Western businessmen, and I found out, oh my God, businessmen are nice. Oh my God, businessmen can be smart too. And so this is something that overcoming my prejudice and so on. Bob, I don't know if you remember, but I was also the starosta. I was the coordinator of the American group in the USSR in Moscow to negotiate with Aeroflot, to negotiate with Moscow State and Lenin Library and so on. And I realized I liked being with people. I liked negotiating. I liked the wheeling, dealing, deal making. That you know, being in a library, I felt, or being with people, negotiating, I felt guilty that I wasn't in the library. And I realized I liked the interaction, and I love teaching. I love being with students, but I think I felt from a personal point of view, I liked hands-on action. So that's why I wanted to go to Chase Manhattan to get sent to Moscow. Instead, they sent me to Italy. So I'm actually was a successful banker. I think I'm the only guy in history in the world who got the Chairman's Award, Chairman's Club in Citigroup 3 times. So ta-da. So that was my claim to fame. I thought I'd retire at Citigroup. I did, but I got, you know, laid off basically. So anyway, now I'm a managing director of investment bank, but that's more of a hobby, I think, than any real job. This is the story of my life with my wife, a lovely French woman who's from Alsace. She was my French teacher, and I fell in love with her, and she finally agreed to go out with me. I was very lucky about that. And the comment, we have many differences. I think that's also what keeps a couple happy, is when you're not the same. But we both love to travel. So this year has been really tough for us of not being able to travel. And as she says, what's the point of being in New York City if you can't travel, if you can't go to restaurants and you can't go to Broadway? So it's been tough. I think living in Ohio would have been better last year than being in New York. But anyway, we're coming out of it. Here are my kids, photos of this. Alexandra, Bob, she was born after we moved to Italy. Lovely lady, she now lives in Amsterdam. The joke between her and me is that the US was doing so badly compared to Europe last year in the COVID contest of who has the worst situation. In the Netherlands, they were relatively, they did better last year. But the vaccination rollout this year is terrible. And apparently Netherlands is number 25 among the various European countries for vaccination rates. So she says she's gonna go to Serbia to try to get a vaccination anyway. But my son, who's 26, he's getting vaccinated today. So go figure. Anyway, so I'm very lucky with my family. And we've had wonderful family get-togethers, even though we've been separated around the world. You know, and you invest in your family, and the way to do so has always been with family vacations. Top left is the Place de la Concorde in Paris. Next to that is in a snapshot in Saudi, the Milano, the Duomo, if you've seen that. And then the top right is Zanzibar, and the bottom is the Galapagos. This is a funny gift that my wife thought up for our two kids. Was for their 30th and 20th birthdays. We said, we'll take you to anywhere in the world where you want to go. And they came up with Galapagos. So that was a lot of fun. Here's me today. And I will be going out to Long Island, the boat yard, to get my boat ready and trying to get the boat in the water by April 20th. So I love sailing. That's a passion I've had since I was a kid. So now in terms of snapshots of where I could have had photographs for you guys. Mongolia, that was fantastic. Manchuria, Harbin, Bob, if you've ever heard of that, the Russian community up there, the Harbin Ice Festival, going to Tibet. And I can tell you, however much affection I have for China, the way the Chinese treat the Tibetans was really scary. Really ethnic cleansing was what the Tibetans were talking about and what they felt from China. And if anybody's Chinese in this call, I apologize, but that's what we found in Lhasa. And I'm sure the Uyghur stuff in the Muslim part of China is probably not different. Samarkand, Bukhara is in the Soviet Central Asia. The Matterhorn is where I would usually meet with my daughter for skiing. Istanbul is fantastic and a great central place between Europe and the Middle East. Botswana, Ethiopia, Red Sea, I mean, all these places were wonderful, and going out of Saudi was great. But one thing I loved was the Great Ocean Drive and getting away from Saudi, at least for a drink or two, in Dubai and Qatar. You'll love this for Republicans there. This was in Zanzibar, the photo of me with an Obama shirt. This is in a trip through Zanzibar. On the left is the Great Ocean Drive in Australia. The Galapagos to the bottom left, and Botswana is the lion. That my wife took that photo. I thought these were other nice photos of, you know, what's funky, what's different for a small town kid in America going overseas and working overseas. So these were real geishas in Kyoto. Japan is one of the most fascinating places in Asia, and I've always been happy to be in Japan anytime I've been there. And a word of interest for any skier, Japanese skiing is really great. India, this is the Kerala area where we went for one vacation in India. I've been to India about 10 times, my wife around 20. It's always a challenging country, but always fascinating as well. Never made it to Pakistan, not sad about that, but I hear it's beautiful. But I have been to Bangladesh and Bhutan as well. So actually here is some photos from Bhutan, which is, they claim that the world's greatest natural happiness, instead of GNP, it's greatest GNH, greatest national happiness. It's getting more commercial now, but they really discourage tourism. And so it's a really pristine, lovely place. The same also going to Myanmar or Burma. We went there as a visit that was organized by the USO out of Hong Kong, I believe. And Burma also was a place untouched when we were there in the 90s, but I think it's changed now as well. These are some other snapshots. My son wanted to make sure you see the photo of me, the top right. Asia is a little different than America for politically correct. And so there is much more of an open, like Italian men, ciao bello kind of thing. Asian women and Asian men get along in a way differently than American American men and women do. And so my wife had to put up with this, but this is a fact of life, especially being a businessman in Asia. You're supposed to go to drinking sessions in the evening to bond with your team. So that's something as a fact of life about Asian business. This was, again, for Vietnam. This was in central Vietnam at the top left, going to see Hue, where the Hue Cathedral, the Citadel, where the terrible fighting in 1968. In Indonesia, Borobudur is a big temple you'll see in the middle right. Then also these are Buddhist monks on the bottom right. There's a Vietnamese ceremony that we're invited to on the bottom left. And that's me in Australia with the Great Ocean Drive. Now, these are some snapshots of where I was before I came to America. And as an American, I had a very strong prejudice against against Islam, against Arabs. Just to confess it, I think part of my education is coming to grips with my own prejudices. I remember the first time I came to Turkey, which was when I lived in Italy in the 80s. And I felt terrified because as a little kid, reading about the glorious Crusaders, and the Turks would have their knives and slash your throat, I was terrified. Same also going to Central Asia with the Russians saying, watch out for those Muslims. And so that was part of what I had to overcome coming to the Middle East. And what I found a passion for was Saudi people. Arabic culture is extremely warm and friendly. Americans are very warm and friendly. People around the world are very warm and friendly. Russians are amazingly warm and friendly. But the Bedouin hospitality is also something special. The whole logic, I guess like Eskimos or something, if you're trekking through the desert, you have no water, you have no food, you come upon a tent, that person in the tent should welcome you. And so there is this hostility toward foreigners, but also incredibly warm greetings. That's my car with a lady flying with it. I was not happy to go airborne. What happened, she was trying to get over the dunes. Going dune riding requires a real skill because you need to power up. I had a stick shift. I've always driven with a stick shift. But you can't downshift, because if you're going up a sand dune and you're shift gearing, that 1 or 2 seconds of changing the gear and then snapping into the lower gear for the better traction actually digs you into the ground. So what you have to do is rev up really high in second. You just feel like you're killing the engine, but you have to rev up really high and go as fast as you can, and then let off 1 microsecond before you get to the top, and then glide over, because if you don't ram it, you're never going to get over. But if you don't stop it at the last second, you're going to go airborne. So I never did go airborne, but a friend of mine did. My wife and I in the bottom with our dog. This is going to the empty quarter, which is the biggest natural sand dune desert in the world, actually bigger sand dunes than in the Sahara. Why not? Also, Svalbard, the polar version of a desert. My wife is an author, so an advertising I can do not only for my brother, but also for my wife. She has a book called The Polar Bear and the Palm Tree that's about her own life in Saudi as a French woman. She was a French teacher for Berlitz as a young, 22-year-old lady teaching French in a palace to a Saudi princess, one of the sisters of the current king, as a matter of fact. And this is in the early 90s with Desert Storm and everything, with Saddam Hussein attacking Kuwait. And so this book is a novelistic portrayal of her memoirs. But as a part of it, we also did a tour in Norway. And she wanted to see polar bears. And so I gave her a gift of the polar bear and a palm tree. And she said, that's the title for my book. So her whole dream was to get to the Spitsbergen Islands, Svalbard, which is really is higher than Port Barrow, Alaska. I mean, it's right, 100 miles away from the Arctic ice cap at the top of Greenland. And that was really surreal and a place I want to get back to. I was supposed to go to Antarctica with my wife on a cruise last winter. Guess what got canceled, postponed. Anyway, but I love the deserts, whether with sand or with ice. Now, this is the last segment I'm going to talk about. Then we can have a discussion. But this is a special cuckoo, hello, Bob, note between us. Bob will appreciate the reference also to my friend here. The study, if you think about how you do history, you can do history from the top down, or history from the bottom up. If I would do the history top down, I'd write about Lincoln, or George Washington, stuff like that. If you do the bottoms up, which is what the kind of stress of Russian history, Russian Soviet studies that Bob and I think we're both part of, what really counts is getting down into the micro detail. As I mentioned, my view of the Tolstoy view of war and peace and so on, that individual people and their actions collectively make a difference. If you look at Russian history, one area that I found fascinating was the Volga. And the town that seemed to have a lot happening, for better or worse, was called Saratov, right in the middle of the Volga, which would be, if you think about the US, if you wanted to do a history of the civil rights movement and slavery and the Civil War in the US, why wouldn't you pick Selma, Alabama as one microcosm, the history of Selma, Alabama from 1750 to 2021? I'd love to do that. And that's sort of what I was doing, with changes and so on, but I was trying to get into the granularity of local regional history. As Bob knows, the tragedy was Saratov and many parts of the USSR were closed, top secret military installations. You can't go there. And I lobbied for the whole year when we were there to get a chance to see the Volga River. And I included in my dissertation also another province on the Volga, which is where Lenin came from. And Lenin's hometown was, of course, tourist site, open. They allowed me to go the last few days that we were supposed to leave. And I said, screw you guys. That's really typically cruel Soviet kind of treatment. After 11 months of lobbying, your train ticket is ready to go. Oh, by the way, we'll let you go visit the Volga now. So I never made it to the Volga. And as a special gift between myself and another historian who also, like Bob, is from University of Michigan, who studied peasants and so on, Tim Mixter is his name, we agreed to meet in Saratov. And so that was, to me, a dream come true, finally to see the Volga. If you see, the Russian church on the top right, Russian churches to me are so beautiful. Tim and I are standing on the hillside overlooking the Volga in the bottom right. He's a Red Sox fan. I'm sorry for any of you guys if you don't like the Red Sox. A typical Russian village scene to the bottom left. And the top left is me pointing to the monument. Bob, you love this. This is the Zemstva school and hospital that was set up by one of my the guys I studied, a guy named Chenikayev, who is a radical and a liberal. And that was part of the non-Bolshevik, the good guys, let's say, of the Russian Revolution. They all lost, but in any case, this was a monument to the whole thing of these radical liberals is that they're trying to help the peasants. They're trying to educate them, trying to give them social services and medicine and so on. So I was very happy to see his hospital. This is the town of Saratov. The lady to the right, Bob will laugh, but that to me is a very typical image of walking the streets of Saratov. The church to the left is is the downtown main square. I'm going to close with this. This is a special moment. Tim, whose head you see on the top right, he was friends with a teacher in the middle, on the top right, in the blue blouse. She organized this meeting with other Russian historians, and they asked me to give a talk about, how is it possible for a Russian history specialist of the Zemstva in Saratov and Mr. Chenikayev, what the hell are you doing you're a banker in Saudi Arabia. How did that happen? Please tell us about this. It's sort of the same talk as right now. Oh, by the way, they don't speak English. So yeah, Amerikansky bankier, Bob would be very impressed. My Russian is not great. It's rusty after 30 years or so of being out of it, but I still could talk. And I actually spent a weekend with my friend Tim in a small Russian Soviet Khrushchev apartment, just very tiny place where 5 people were living. For the whole weekend. It was only in Russian, and so I did okay, Bob. Anyway, so that was a high point to me to sort of retrospectively say, what are my lessons for Russian historians and what I learned as a banker? So here my message in terms of what I'd like to share with Rotary Club in Ohio, and then we can open up for any questions. So first of all, Russia, the USSR made me a firm capitalist. If you remember the slide about me as a young hippie and radicalized and so on, yes. Radical like Teddy Roosevelt, radical like Franklin D. Roosevelt, radical like Abraham Lincoln. So there are a lot of good traditional virtues of American history that I think we can all feel proud of. But Russia, above all, taught me about liberty, freedom of speech, private property, and so on. And the black market taught me about doing business. Bob, maybe also that you did some trading for coffee when you were in Moscow State yourself. Now, in terms of Marxism and Russian, from a purely academic point of view, studying economics, studying the revolution, looking at the revolution from the bottoms up, I was looking at the development of capitalism in the Russian agrarian economy, in the introduction of agricultural improvements, and the Caterpillar tractors and the introduction of machinery coming from the West into the Russian market, the Dresden German grain trade and the Istanbul grain trade. The correlation you could see between that and what was happening in the countryside, relations between peasants and the landlords. And what I found was that the landlords were getting more aggressive. They were getting more dynamic. They were becoming better businessmen. And at the same time, the Zemstva guys were teaching them education. And so that was part of the economic history that I was studying in the Revolution. And so this is something that was interesting for the Russian students to realize. I actually read Das Kapital and actually understand Marx's economics, and I understand liberal economics and Milton Friedman. One joke I have is that anybody who's actually taken the bother to read Das Kapital, volume 2, page 387 or whatever, Karl Marx talks about his vision of the future of communism. The communism is when the people own the means of production, that people should own capital, which means this new thing called the joint stock company is communism. And there's a new company, the Aktiengesellschaft, Siemens AG, or the US General Electric. Karl Marx talks about that in Das Kapital, representing the future of the people owning. So who would have ever guessed the internet.com going IPO and stuff like that? That's part of what Karl Marx also talked about. Anyway, so I do think that, Marx's stuff had a role in their understanding of the Russian Revolution, but people and individuals also. And so my conclusion is things are complex. And if you really want to get me pissed off, when you come to me with big, gross generalizations. Bob, I don't know if the same thing, being a professor, gave you the same impatience with gross generalizations, but when anybody makes a sweeping statement, this is nobody, I always feel, wait a minute, that's not true. The reality is blah, blah, blah. And I think I piss off people back. I especially in banking, when I try to say, you know, on the one hand, on the other hand, sometimes people want things simple, and I appreciate that. In the business world, you got to come to the conclusion. But reality is complex, is what I learned as an historian, and I can give you guys a hint for my favorite reading. It still is history. The last point is about people. I have a lot of jokes about this. I have been taken aside in many different languages, told to confess that their country is number one. So, you know, if you remember the happiness we had in Lake Placid with the Miracle on Ice, with the USA hockey team beating the USSR hockey team, USA. And of course, all of us Americans say, you know, let's be honest, we're number one. Well, it's not always true. In some ways, America is not number one, but other countries, the same thing. The Italians would always say, come on, guys, we had the Roman Empire. You know, there's nothing more to say. All you guys are all losers compared to us Romans. The French, my God, l'Empire français. But the Russians also, the same thing. We are number one. And the joke also, Bob, about the Soviet Union. What's the Soviet definition of a computer chip, Bob? Answer: the biggest computer chip the world has ever seen. So anyway, every country has its own foibles, but I take a much more distant view to say people are people, and I could have been born in Madagascar, I could have been born in Mongolian, who knows? But I don't find people radically different, and so I want to give people the time of day wherever they are, and whatever religion or in whatever language. I love studying languages because it's a way to get into the head of the culture and thinking about a foreign culture. My joke about Korean, I studied Korean for some time. I was not good, but I would at least taxi Korean, I was okay to function. My joke about Korean is that you need to know the CV and the personal family lineage of anybody you're talking to before you can ask them, can I go to the bathroom? Or where is the bathroom? Because it's a very highly Confucian society. Confucius, man over woman, older versus younger, brother equal. Everything is hierarchy, and the language reflects that as well. Arabic is very funny, also from the Arab point of view. After living in Asia for 10 years, moving to the Middle East, which was sort of against, you know, no way do I want to be in the Middle East, no way do I want to be in Saudi Arabia, but the best job was there, so I took it. But what I found was that going to the Middle East, going to the Muslim Islamic world, the Arabic world, was coming home to me compared to being in Asia. Let me explain. In Asia, you've got to know about Buddhism, and Buddhism is really hard to understand because you have different variants and it's things to memorize. It's like, Bob, the Russian Orthodox Church and all the saints and stuff. It's not an easy religion to get into. Shintoism in Japan and so on. And so Asian religions to me were really foreign. The same also with Asian languages. You know, between Russian and Latin and Italian and French, you can sort of wing it and guess some stuff. You cannot in Asian languages. There's very little in common. Well, guess what? When you get to the Middle East, a lot of stuff, admiral is an Arabic word, magazine is an Arabic word. There are a lot of things that through the Islamic conquest of North Africa, getting into Spain, this is in the time of the, before the Crusade and so on, you had in Iraq, what is today Iraq, the center of knowledge in the world in the 11th century, 20th century, where Arab scholars learned picking up Latin and Greek texts and translating them into Arabic, which then eventually got translated from Arabic into Latin through Spain and France, which then became Bologna University and Paris University. All of our studies came through the same common knowledge. So what was weird to me, somebody who was terrified of the Arab world and so on going in there, was to realize this is familiar. Then, you know, after reading Karl Marx, I read the Quran. You know, I've been studying Buddhism as a good Episcopalian Western Christian. Let me study Buddhism. I learned Catholicism in Italy and so on. let me give, the Arabs a chance, read the Quran. Guess what? It was so boring. The first 100 pages were identical to the Old Testament. And I kept on reading saying, where's the beef? What's special about Islam compared to what I know in Christianity and so on? And from that point of view, you get into very fine stuff, but the basics become more and more blended together into what one person said to me in Saudi Arabia. Tom, let's be honest, religions, what we're talking about is ethics of do good for other people, be kind, be honest. All the 10 commandments, all those things are basic to Arabs and to Jews and also to Christians. So I felt returning home in Saudi Arabia, realizing I'm part of the people of the book of the 3 religions, all based on the Old Testament. So anyway, people in the world pretty much the same. Learn to appreciate different countries, each for what they have to offer. So I have a lot of affection for Ohioans. I have many Republican friends. My dad was a very strong Republican, and he said, I haven't left the Republican Party. They have left me because he's a Eisenhower Republican. So I think of a Teddy Roosevelt, Eisenhower, Nelson Rockefeller Republican is where I am. So I have friends on all sides of the spectrum, and so I will stop here. So that's it. And I will now open up for any questions.
Thank you so much for a very interesting discussion. We've got time for a couple questions. Anybody?
Yeah, Tom, this is Lee. I want to thank you for a very insightful international presentation for those of us that have been outside the country. I got smiles on my faces a number of times having gone through those same experiences. Do you still have the same travel lust that you had 30 years ago?
Mix, you're right. That's a good question. By the way, Lee, my salute to you with Vietnam vets. Thanks for your hat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. But I also have a mixed feeling because I yearn to have a hometown with a sailboat. Anytime my wife and I talk about going away, I think, well, excuse me, but it's the sailing season now. And so you do have that conflict. But the one part of the world I'd like to know more is Africa, Namibia in particular, for the dunes there. I really want to go there. Latin America is a missing part for me. I've been to Brazil and Argentina and Venezuela and Colombia, but not enough. And so also going through Chile and Argentina. So I want to do that. And so my wife and I yearn for international travel, but it's also nice to be home. So yeah. It's a conflict. How about yourself? Do you travel much?
Yeah, I did at one time, and I remember these Asian every night dinners where you had to drink from 9 o'clock at night until 1 a.m. in the morning in order to be part of the business community.
Exactly. And with your team, they, at least, especially with Koreans and Japanese, the way that they get the chance to talk with you is when they've been drinking, because then they sort of, all their confessions come out, but they're so uptight otherwise. So it's part of the business fragment there.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Anyone?
Yes, I would like to ask you how you describe the Russian system today. They tried communism and they failed, clearly. What do they have now to replace it?
Hi, William. Good question. I don't know in terms, I think they have capitalism, but it's very strongly cronyism. It's all oligarchs. I think what happened was during the privatization in the 90s, and maybe Bob would know this better than I, but my impression is that they sort of sold everything on, for a dime with the privatization, and Yeltsin, with as part of the post-USSR sell-off of the private of all the state-owned enterprises, you could buy up the ex-Soviet economy for nothing, and that led to the oligarchs. And then you have incredibly corrupt bribery and so on. And when Bob's friend and I were in the Volga for that visit in 2013, the people in the provinces were saying we're dying. the villages are dying. Everything is politically connected and in Moscow. So it's all cronyism as far as I can see. And
Well,
as
Yeah. Aren't you saying they're capitalists, but they've been described as failed capitalists? They failed at communism. Are they succeeding as capitalists?
I don't know. I mean, I think probably there are good, decent Russians having good, decent businesses, but I
Yeah.
think it's hard to avoid the state with bribery pressure and stuff like that. That's my impression. I don't know if they're failed. I mean, it's a different kind of capitalism. The Chinese are capitalists also, but it's a different kind of capitalism. Japanese and Korean stuff. So capitalism, the idea of private enterprise has various different ways you can do it. You know, the famous thing about socialism in Denmark, they're capitalists in Denmark. You know, so the Russians are capitalists, but they just are on the make. You know, the big boss wants his cut.
Will they succeed, do you think, in
I'm
capitalism?
sorry, what?
Will they succeed as capitalists?
I think they will remain on the path they are in, which is an energy-heavy oligarchy.
Yeah.
The question is, for small businesses, can you survive? The U.S. thrives for small businesses, and I love small businesses. I don't know if small business can make it. It's more, you know, being in a big giant company in Russia, hurting the small guy, I think is the way that the Russian business works. My impression.
Thank you.
Tom, thank you so much for your time today and your interesting talk. We'll be putting a book in the Lane Library in honor of your talk. And while you were talking, I did check to see if there are Rotary clubs in Manhattan, and I think I saw at least 3.
Okay.
So